Thank you, Elaine. And I'm going to be sharing slides, although I was glad that I got the chance to see you all first, because sometimes some of your faces disappear when I do that. But I'll share these out to kind of keep me on track. But can everyone see those? Great. So good morning, and thank you so much for being here. I'm Krista Thorpe. As Elaine mentioned, I work at Island Institute. I'm the Broadband project lead. I'm excited to be here on behalf also of the Maine Broadband Coalition and supporting Sunrise County Economic Council to kick off this broadband boot camp. I'm zooming in from my home in the small mid-coast community of Bremen, but I often tell people that I think my heart feels most at home down east, Maine. So I'm again excited to hear where you're all from. I would love to make use of the chat function today. And we're not a huge group, so I think there'll also be opportunities for just speaking up and interacting with questions as well. But if you could start off just pasting in the chat, typing in the chat your name, your town, your role, your goal for today. I'll paste those prompts in the chat. That would help us kind of kick off a little more interactively, and also just give me a better sense of who's here and what you're here to learn. And exactly, it can be Rhonda, it can be just straight up broadband. We're here at Broadband 101. But if you have any specific goals that you want to mention now, again, throughout today, we'll have the chance to have questions, and you'll see this little chat logo whenever I'm asking you to throw something in there. So as you do that, if you find the chat down at the bottom of your screen, as you introduce yourselves, I will go ahead and give a quick background on the Island Institute for those who aren't familiar. So founded in 1983, the Island Institute is a community development nonprofit organization that's based in Rockland, Maine. And we have more than 50 full-time staff serving 152 coastal communities, including the 15 remaining year-round unbridged islands in Maine. The mission of the Island Institute is to help sustain island and coastal communities with a focus on empowering strong leaders, developing climate solutions, and creating resilient economies. Broadband, in my opinion, fits all three of these mission focuses, but we have been especially on focusing on the resilient economy and kind of year-round sustainability. We've been supporting community-driven broadband efforts and helping lead also the state broadband conversations for over 6 years now. And actually, my colleague Nick Batista is also here, so I'm going to let him introduce himself, and I'm going to catch up on some of the introductions in the chat.
Cool, thanks, Krista. Nick Batista, I'm the Chief Policy Officer at the Island Institute. In the broadband realm, I wear a couple of different hats. The first one is co-leading the Maine Broadband Coalition's Governance Committee and providing some staff support and capacity to Krista and Clara and other folks working on the Maine Broadband Coalition. The second hat I wear is I chair the Connect Maine Authority Board. And so that's also a big one in the broadband space. I'm here to cheer you guys on today. Thank you for coming. Start building some of these connections. Personally, Lubec, my dad, when he came to the U.S. from Canada, was a doctor in Lubec for a few years back in the late 70s. So I saw some folks from Lubec coming up here, and so there's a strong family tie going back up to your part of the world. I live in Camden and have worked at the Island Institute for about 10 years, a little bit more. So always happy to be a resource. Feel free to reach out. Looking forward to getting to know you all a little bit more and connecting with you. And the last thing I would just say is, the broadband boot camp happened in the Maine West area. And there are a number of us from various roles in Connect Maine or the Maine Broadband Coalition are involved in statewide conversations who joined and met people working in the Maine West area. We're still supporting those people, still helping them, still aware of their projects. It's a great way to showcase the activity that's happening in your communities. And I think it's just worth saying that the folks involved in broadband at the state level are paying attention to efforts like this boot camp.
There's my mute. Thanks, Nick. I'm glad you mentioned that. I think we're so lucky in Maine to have the support at the state level that we do, both within the government, but also through things like the Maine Broadband Coalition. So if you haven't heard of or gotten involved with the Maine Broadband Coalition yet, do. There's only so much I can cover today, as much as I'll try to make it digestible. We know that there can be a really steep learning curve on broadband, and the purpose of the Maine Broadband Coalition is to support community-driven broadband. It's a network made up of public policy wonks, educational advocates, businesses, nonprofit organizations, government agencies, and individuals. Anyone is welcome to become a member who care deeply about Maine's digital future. We as a coalition believe in the importance of community-driven broadband. And just because, I'll say this a few times today, but just because there's new funding coming in top down doesn't decrease the importance at all of the community-driven, multi-organizational, the collaborative aspect of moving this goal forward. The Maine Broadband Coalition goal is a future of reliable, accessible, and affordable. I saw a couple of those things mentioned in the chat. High-speed internet for everyone. So everyone is welcome. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to have some highlights, acronym alerts, because we know that we overuse acronyms in this work. And so MBC is probably how I'll refer to Maine Broadband Coalition. If you go to the website, I'll have next steps at the end as well, and you can it's very easy to sign up as a member. You don't get inundated with info, but the info you get is valuable. So I today am going to, similarly maybe to this whole boot camp, kind of walk through who, what, where, and why of broadband, and really trying to base it as much as possible in Maine and Washington County, although I'm also glad to see some folks from other counties here. So the rest of the boot camp, I think we'll really get a little more into the when and the how. So I'll get rid of that little black box. I can't. Yeah, and I'm excited to kind of be able to allude to some of those, but who, what, where, and why, and again, note the acronym alerts. So starting with the state players, folks might have gotten a little confused in the last year when the state stood up a new agency, which is charged with achieving the universal access of affordable high-speed broadband in Maine, and that is the Maine Connectivity Authority. And this was, you can get into all the details of it, but it was needed in order to have a place for that big federal funding to come through and to be able to actually start setting a strategy for how to achieve this statewide access. I'll go a little bit more into some of the players there at the MCA later, but hopefully many of you already are familiar with Connect Maine, that has been around since 2006, supporting community broadband planning and administering grants through a grant program that, again, only recently has had bigger chunks of money available to actually start to solving the problem. So these two organizations, MCA and Connect Maine, are continuing to work together to achieve Maine's broadband goals. And again, feeling very lucky that the people who are running these organizations are accessible to people like us in communities in Maine. Another who that is absolutely central to this conversation of how to get broadband done in Maine are the internet service providers. Highly used acronym is ISPs. So I might refer again to ISPs here. These are just a few of them. We have a lot of ISPs offering service in Maine. These are some of the ones that I know are active in parts of Washington County. So the wired network providers, we have cable providers, Spectrum, Comcast. There are telecom providers, those who've been providing phone service since the start and have gone through different, maybe names and consolidations, but a lot of these telecom providers are also now providing fiber. Some of and we'll get into each of those technologies in the what section. And then we've also got ISPs that are wireless based. So cellular networks, satellite technology. Again, I'll get a little bit more into these, but I think just going back to that previous slide around the state players, I think it's important to note that the wireless technologies, satellite technologies tend not to be available for state subsidies because of issues like unreliability or data caps, which the state has rules around kind of which technologies they can invest public dollars in, knowing that they need to be able to serve kind of in a certain consistent and affordable way. So another chance to, and I'm glad that, and I can't actually pronounce George Henner, maybe the name there, but just mentioned, should AT&T be in this list? Yes, I only included a few samples just to kind of give you a sense of those ISPs, but there are many more. So wondering if you know who the incumbent ISPs, those who exist already and are giving service, providing service currently in your community are. So, yep, we've got Consolidated, Spectrum and Consolidated. This is really helpful for folks like Elaine, people like Nick, people like me, to know who the incumbents already in your community are, because that actually can help us find other communities that have found solutions with those same providers, and you can reach out to those communities and share info about how you formed public-private partnerships, what some of the challenges are with certain providers. So great to see these here. All right, yes, and Starlink, we'll kind of cover that as well. So we've got the government, we've got the state, we've got the ISPs, and then we have this third party of players in the broadband sphere in Maine that is often referred to as technical assistants, sometimes shortened to TA. They are, not ISPs necessarily, although sometimes there are folks who definitely span multiple roles, but these are tend to be partners who can help you with the broadband planning, whether that's just on a service, mission-focused basis, like Sunrise Economic Council, Island Institute, Maine Broadband Coalition. These are organizations that don't charge for the support that is out there to support your communities, and then you can also hire consultants, and some of the common ones working in Maine are mentioned there, but all of this we can kind of go into questions, or you'll have the chance to learn more about in future sessions. And then we cannot talk about the who without talking about you. I think as Nick mentioned early on, we are here to cheer you on as the broadband leaders in your community, even if you haven't willingly taken on that title yet. And that's because we have evidence that successful projects result from an engaged community, starting with a local champion. Sometimes it's the one person who really starts stirring things up, but ultimately it has to be a broader community effort to be able to kind of set your goals, understand the needs in your community, and then be able to attract funding to help meet those needs, to be willing to invest some local dollars. So a successful broadband committee, it's important to keep in mind, tends to have just a good representation of who's in your community. So I'm going to be sharing the Island Institute's community-driven broadband process guide, but you'll see similar recommendations across, any broadband process guide is basically that you should pull together a diverse set of folks to work on this if you're able. That could include, the important thing about including a municipal official at some point in the process is that they're the ones who are going to be able to lead processes around community-wide votes for how to spend funding, having educators, people who can reach, the stories of those trying to access education at all levels. Yeah, community, you can see the range here, but and feel free to throw into the chat if you are one of these, if you consider yourself one of these. I'm also curious to know kind of who we have represented here, if you're more on the municipal official side, if you are business owners, if you're telecommuters. So I didn't put the little, chat prompt there, but I'll take it. All right, moving on from the who for now, into some of the what. And there's a lot of what, and sometimes it's not necessarily, you're not going to remember all of this right off from today's presentation. So there are lots of glossaries out there. Google is wonderful for figuring out what all the terms in broadband mean, but I appreciated the town of Vinyl Haven's broadband committee put together just nice straightforward glossary with English spoken language about these technologies that I like referring back to. So DSL, probably all of those who mentioned having consolidated as your internet service provider at this point are getting DSL service. That's basically a technology where these telecom companies use the same wires that deliver phone service to transmit internet data. Copper, they're made from copper, so weather and things like that can degrade them over time. Cable, or you might hear coaxial cables, are also a copper infrastructure, but it's higher capacity, delivers your TV service, and in a similar technological way as phone lines transmit data. So those of you who are coming here and just thinking like, I'm not the technical expert, I don't get technology, I still don't understand how a telephone works. Like I mean, to me, it's just fascinating, like a wired phone, the idea that my voice gets from one place to the other. So I don't actually understand the technology. I just know that, this is all you really need to know. So don't be hard on yourself. I'm giving a Broadband 101 presentation. Never would have expected that. I was an English teacher. All right. The problem with these technologies is that service does degrade over distance. And so basically it's, your internet service provider says that they're delivering you speeds of 10/1 if they're DSL, or, maybe it's a cable company that has a service available of 200 over 10 or 20. The problem is the further you're down from where they're delivering that speed, and the more people who are using it between where they're delivering it from and where your house is, the worse the speeds get. So distance is an issue. Satellite and wireless I'll go into a couple of the ones that have become more hot topics recently, but basically you're getting your data signal is going up to a satellite and bouncing back down. It requires that kind of clean line of sight all the way to the satellite. Or if you're using wireless technology, there's data transmitted between towers or from towers to your location. An issue with anything that has to travel wirelessly is latency. Latency refers to the delay. So you might see on Zoom sometimes like somebody's talking and their voice is completely off from their picture, or or you ask them a question and there's an awkward pause, and then they answer it, it's not because they were having a hard time coming up with the answer, it's because there was a delay in the signal of your voice reaching them. So these are a couple of the issues that those technologies can face, which is why you hear a lot about fiber. Fiber optic technology has been around for a long time. When it was first invented decades ago, I don't think that anyone could have anticipated that normal people like me, I now have a fiber connection. This is new in my home, in my town, but that we would have even needed this. We've just changed so much has been created as far as the internet. So people often wonder, well, if our needs have increased so much by now, how do we know that this technology that everyone is saying is the technology we should be putting in is going to last into the future as well? And that's because basically, with the signal being sent through these glass or plastic clear strands the size of a human hair, signals data is being transmitted at the speed of light, and the only thing that really affects or limits the speed and the amount of data that you can send through a fiber optic cable is are the electronics like on either end. And so basically we're able to look ahead into the future and know that the fibers themselves can hold up, they don't degrade like copper, and that the technology at the control office or the nodes can be upgraded and basically up to infinite speeds. And so that's why you'll often hear future proof associated with fiber. And I'm sure that if there are questions, we can kind of get nerdy on fiber a little later, but a very common acronym you're going to hear is FTTH or FTTP, which is fiber to the home, fiber to the premise. And this will make a little more sense, I think, on the next slide after this one, when we talk about kind of the different parts of the infrastructure. But important to just note before we get into the details of fiber and move on from it, what about those newfangled technologies? What about Starlink? What about 5G? I have to kind of adjust my computer so I can see my notes for a moment, but I'm going to share out these slides after this presentation, and you'll be able to access these links. There's a great article up right now on the Maine Broadband Coalition website by a fellow from Liberty, Maine, Joe Meadows, who has been using Starlink as a beta tester. It's still in beta phase, but there are a lot of Mainers who are using it, and it has saved them. It's suddenly they have internet. It is a solution, but those who are using it can definitely speak to the kind of risks and downsides. One currently being affordability. It's I think $100 a month currently, but there's just a lot of unknowns of how they'll be able to offer this technology affordably. And then there are, even though Starlink depends on low orbit satellites, which is a difference from traditional satellites, there are still going to be issues related to your topography, the trees, the hills. All right, see you, Nick. And so that article gives great detail. I highly recommend it. And I'll also reference at the end of this presentation a weekly broadband open discussion hour that Island Institute hosts. We have one guy who uses Starlink on there. He's a photographer from the Blue Hill Peninsula and has to upload, a lot of data. And he's always willing to talk about that experience, especially to people who are hearing within their communities. This might be our answer. All right, 5G. I'm not going to go very much into it, but I really like this quote. I've used it a lot from Susan Crawford, her book, Fiber, The Coming Tech Revolution and Why America Might Miss It. She says, fiber and wireless are complementary technologies. Saying the future is wireless, who cares about fiber, is like saying we can have airplanes without airports, and I often say that, like, wait, we have airplanes. Why do we need airports? Well, you need somewhere for that signal to land. There needs to be dense fiber infrastructure in order for 5G to be deployed. Kind of similarly to Starlink's approach, and compared to other cellular technology, 5G, everything has to be kind of a lot closer. It depends on more towers, and every one of those towers has to be connected to a strong backbone of fiber. So 5G won't come until we have enough fiber deployed in the state. Few more technology pieces, terminology pieces. So some of you may have heard about Maine's 3-ring binder. This is a specific infrastructure that was built in the state of Maine that is considered backbone fiber infrastructure. So it is the big, interstate highway of data of fiber that ends up serving all of the fiber networks kind of within them and between them. And the middle mile term refers to the basically the fiber that is going to go from these kind of big data centers the backbone fiber, to maybe the central office or the area in your community that then starts feeding out to the last mile, which is, my road. Think of it as your driveway. There's a really great description of all of these backbone, the middle mile and the last mile, especially on this glossary. So I think it's again, a great one to reference so that you don't fall asleep listening to me try to talk about these technologies. But an important one on last mile, and the reason that we talk so much about the last mile is, and I'll kind of get to it when we look at the where, and specifically around some of Maine's mapping challenges or access challenges. But the last mile is really where you get to that issue of universal access, and if you want everybody in your community to be able to access the internet equally, for the various reasons we'll talk about when we get to the why, you need to have a plan for getting last mile infrastructure built, whatever that technology is. And the reason that you're going to hear a lot of communities looking for that fiber for their last mile is because it's a big investment. The last mile is usually the most expensive. It's the farthest from the the central office, the internet service provider, the 3-ring binder potentially, and it just becomes more and more expensive the less dense you get, the farther out into the boonies you get. A couple more just terms kind of related to this idea of constructing a network that will definitely get covered more later in the boot camp are municipal network, locally owned network. A municipal network doesn't have to be run by a town. It can be run by an ISP who works with the town, an internet service provider who works with the town. One term I didn't put in here, but I'm going to actually make sure to share a resource on later, is also broadband utility districts. Washington County is familiar with this through the Down East Broadband Utility, but in both the case of a municipal network and a utility district, you're seeing this infrastructure, whether it's middle mile or whether it's just last mile, but it's not the backbone, but either the middle mile or last mile infrastructure actually being owned as an asset by a community or a district. And if you're starting down the road of developing a municipal network, you're going to be hearing a lot about make ready as part of your timeline. Make ready refers to a process that you have to go through to get all the pole licensing, like every one of the poles in Maine is owned by somebody. Some of the time nobody actually knows who, so you have to hunt down like who owns this pole. You have to go through a licensing process in order to be able to get your own infrastructure onto that pole. Internet service providers have to go through the make ready process as well. It can add several months, and it's kind of seems like it has gotten longer in recent months, this make ready process. But the state is trying to do things at a policy level to make ready a little faster. So what, because we've just gone through a lot of these whats, I want to give you kind of a immediately practical call related to it. Peggy Schaefer last summer or fall wrote an article. She is the director of the Connect Maine Authority, and that currently and has been the state body that gives grants to communities that apply to communities and ISPs. And from where she sits, trying to get this money to the communities that need it most, she has seen a lot of communities go through a process where they just start spinning their wheels. There's so much what out there. There's so many options and solutions. Sometimes it feels like there aren't enough for your particular community, but I mean, they're out there. It's just often a matter of the cost. And so she tries to help communities kind of slim it all down to, you've got 3 decisions to make. Once you've figured out what technology is out there, what options are out there, these are the 3 decisions you're going to be working toward. The question of whether you want universal service, I'm going to loop back around to this one when we get to the why of broadband, but just thinking in terms of the infrastructure, universal service is the last mile, the last driveway. Every home in your community has access to the same service, to broadband. Might not be the exact same technology if you're a community where it makes sense to mix and match, but everybody has broadband. Do you want FTTH? Do you want fiber to the home, specifically the fiber thing? And then do you want to own the infrastructure? This is it is a big decision, but you usually have a pretty good hunch for those of you where you are, from where you sit in the centers of your communities, you probably have a sense of whether or not your community would be interested in pursuing that conversation. But if you don't, we're going to be able to come back to it in the why. So if you feel like you personally or your community already has a sense of the answers to these, universal service, FTTH, own the infrastructure, go ahead and type, like yes, no, yes, or yes, yes, no, or whatever into the chat. I'm going to take a quick break from the screen share and then relaunch it because I have to kind of make some of my notes more accessible on my screen. And I did see a question around from Ben Levesque on Make Ready and whether it has budget implications, and it does. One of the costs that, but not huge, and those are costs that you would want to factor into your project right from the start. The ISP, if you work with a private partner, an internet service provider, they would be able to kind of answer this question for you. I think you're going to have a meeting in this boot camp with ISPs, and that would be a great question. Like those kinds of questions are great to ask to the ISPs because this has changed a bit in recent years, the make ready process. There's also, if you are going to own a network, part of the make ready might be on your end, like considering things like the insurance that you need to cover that asset. So there are definitely some things that you would have to have a bit more of a sense of if you were owning the network versus if you were just having an ISP own it. But you also could probably save some costs when you actually are the ones getting the revenue from that asset as well. Before I go back to share, are there any, we've just gone through a lot and we're about to go into the where and the why and get into mapping and maybe some more, locally focused conversations. So wondering if there are any pressing questions at this time or comments. I'm going to try to fix my view. I think it's not quite as pretty, but let's see. View.
And just to take up some space here, you had referenced speeds being like 10/1. What does that mean?
Yeah,
I'm slow.
No, I'm glad you're doing that, because I think it's it's my next slide. Good. And I got my notes in the right place, because I'm not always good with the dual screen. Let's see. All right. Back to sharing. 10/1 or any of those numbers are are referring to your speeds. So sorry, it doesn't look quite as nice as it did before, but I can see my notes now. So the definition of broadband is high speed, reliable internet defined by the download and the upload speeds available. So your bandwidth, your internet service is coming to your home or to your phone or to wherever you're accessing the internet from. And, at the point where you are using it, you have a certain amount of download capacity and upload capacity. Download is how, in Peggy's words, it's how the world talks to Maine, and upload is how Maine talks to the world. I am uploading video to you right now, but I am downloading a whole bunch of things at the same time, like I don't know, this slideshow, anything that you pull off the internet, a lot of what we do, streaming, watching TV, that's all being done with your download speed. Whereas upload is when you're, sending an email or putting something out. Think of it that way. So download and upload are measured by megabits per second. So if you download an attachment, photos are often these days somewhere between 1 megabit and 10 megabits are like your common photos that you might get sent to you from a relative. And so think of those, how long it's going to take you to download that photo if it's 4 megabits, hopefully your connection can handle 4 megabits per second, and you just can open that photo. But we know that even though DSL speeds often say, they're delivering 4 megabits per second as download, I have definitely sat there with my old DSL network and watched something spin and spin while I'm trying to download something as simple as a photo. So again, broadband is defined by download and upload speeds. The FCC has typically set these speeds, the Federal Communications Commission, and it has been for a while now and is still set at 25 megabits per second download, over 3 megabits per second upload being the definition of broadband. But the state and many others, around the country have long recognized that for 21st century needs, that is, no longer considered broadband. The challenge at the federal level is there are folks lobbying to keep this current definition, often because the technology itself, it's hard to get technology to support higher upload speeds. So the technology companies might, be hiring lobbyists to try to keep that 25/3 definition, and you'll hear people just rattle off 100 over 100, 50 over 10, 25/3. They're talking about speed at that point. So Maine has reset its definitions to you are served if you can access at least 100 megabits per second over 100 megabits per second upload and download. That is, at this point, fiber is the only technology that that delivers that. I didn't include the word here, symmetrical, but that symmetrical speed. For people who are doing a lot of both download and upload, as well as people who are running, who are doing technology work, tech work, the symmetrical aspect of the service is really important for certain types of digital work. Most of us do fine with an asymmetrical connection, although you do see it affect your video quality occasionally. But for everyday stuff, for example, even though I have now fiber to my home, my company is offering 50 megabits per second over 10 megabits per second upload as kind of their standard lowest offering. Technologically, they could just as easily offer 50 over 50. They could make it symmetric. I'm kind of pushing for that service because I think that in some ways the 50 over 10 is a little bit just to match the cable speeds, which tend to be what cover most of Maine. So kind of allows them to just price competitively with cable, even if they are a fiber provider. So served at this point in the state. We'll get into a couple of the specific maps, but if you have access to a service that is like, I could pay for 100 over 100 with my current internet service provider. I think I could pay for a gig symmetrical. That's 1,000 megabits per second upload and download, but I don't need it. I pay for the base, but I have access to it, so I am served. Unserved, in the current definition of the state, is if you do not have access to 50 megabits per second over 10. You can't get above that. And so yeah, that's pretty much DSL. Although there are areas where, as I mentioned earlier, because of the distance from your cable provider, you might not be getting those speeds even with other technologies. But typically DSL isn't going to offer anything higher than, I don't know, 5 megabits per second over 1. So those are actually considered, and I didn't mention it here, but the least served in the current Connect Maine grant application. If you're applying as a community, they're going to be weighting the scores of applicants based on the number of premises that are served, that are unserved, and they're also going to be counting those who are least served, those who are under 25.3, because again, that's considered just a past definition that we shouldn't be using anymore. Underserved is also a new category that the state has offered, and this is going to allow all of the grant monies coming in to be basically just going toward fiber build projects. Again, you can raise money, you can kind of find funding to do other technologies, but not necessarily public state funding. The state wants to be investing in that future-proof aspect. So, so they'll say that, if you are a community entirely served by cable, just because of the way that cable infrastructure currently exists, there are some upgrades being made to it, but not really anytime soon in Maine. Because of the way cable works, you're not going to get that 100 megabits per second upload. So the underserved designation can kind of help give some points back to communities that are not considered unserved. Like if you have access to cable, you probably have, the speed to do what you need to do at this point. But if we're putting new investment, new public dollars toward infrastructure, the state would consider, anything that's not fiber at this point to be underserved. So these get a little confusing, but I think ultimately the point of them was to help communities that on the map, if you look at this map here, this is actually the map that's currently provided through the Connect Maine website. If you look up Connect Maine mapping, this is going to be updated soon, but it's the current map. All of this green is basically cable infrastructure. The blue is fiber. So it's at least 100 over 100. The green is, up to 100 download or more, I guess. Like the cable companies do provide more than that, but that's considered now it's considered underserved. In the past, that was considered totally served. You're green, you're good. But there's a recognition that if people are trying to build out future-proof networks, they're going to, that limit on the upload speed through coax is going to hold you back. Any questions about that? Because I'm getting into some of the. I appreciated this. This was just 2 days ago. I saw this letter come from 4 senators that are basically trying to make a case to make sure that the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act recognizes the importance of mapping and therefore the importance of having local programs, like not having a federal program that dictates what what the solution should be for the whole country, but to let each state kind of focus on improving its own maps and deciding how those dollars would best be used given the unique needs of each state. So 4 senators signed on to this, are really leading the charge on the broadband side of the Infrastructure Act. And one of the quotes from this letter that I'm happy to share out after the full letter, but it all starts with getting the maps right. The FCC has consistently overstated broadband coverage around the US. That's because if you try to look up broadbandnow.org, or there are some websites that provide maps of the US coverage, and they show where Maine is in the ranking. The data on those federal maps has been provided by internet service providers, and the internet service providers are, they're telling the FCC that, here we're X company, we provide cable at 200 over 50. So, any community definitely under us meets that 25 over 3 threshold. But we know that if you're 10 miles down that road from that company that's providing you 50 upload, you're probably not actually meeting that threshold. Plus, the maps are just kind of a little too general. They don't get down to that last mile accuracy. So senators are recognizing that this needs to be a policy focus with the rollout of these new funds. Island Institute has done some work specifically for the coast of Maine, trying to interpret some of the challenges around broadband deployment. And this map kind of can make your eyes cross a little bit, but what these little lines are showing is premise density. So I have the link to this afterwards. You can dig into it a little bit more, but basically internet service providers, no matter who you are, you're trying to have a business model that works, a business plan. You're trying to make sure that your investments kind of balance with your income. So that doesn't really happen in places where there's really low premise density. So that's the gray areas and the red areas, basically meaning that the homes are too far apart. So you're having to put a lot of technology, between every one of those homes that you're trying to connect, and more supply costs more money, costs more labor. So it's hard to make an economic argument as a company for, bringing broadband to some of these, very rural parts of Washington County, for instance. And so this is where we make the argument for why there does need to be public investment and public subsidy. This is very similar. You probably have heard people compare where we are now with broadband with where rural electrification was 100 years ago. The last to get electricity were the areas where it was just going to cost a lot more, and private companies weren't jumping up to say I'll do it unless there was some sort of incentive coming publicly. So not going to go deeply into this, but basically the more rural you are, the harder it is for any business to make an economic argument to serve your community. And Sarah, that's a good question. I got a question from Sarah about broadband funds for cable, and let's come back around to that, although I might not be the expert on it today. All right, we do have opportunities to fix the problem. There is a problem with the maps. We know that, the state knows that. Maine is doing a variety of things to get better maps. And one of them is to crowdsource. Other states have done this, to crowdsource actual speeds. So I'm going to drop this in the chat. This speed test link, and I'll take a little break from the slides, and you can also take a stretch break if you need, get some water, because if you go to the Maine Broadband Coalition website, you can do this later as well, although as always, I'm curious what speeds we have in the room today. The state is having people take speed tests. If you've taken it already, no problem, do it again. It's actually better to do multiple speed tests from any one location because, again, back to cable technology, you tend to get different speeds at different times of day, depending on how many people are using the network, because they're all using, from that same data signal. So, yeah, so I think that's a really good point too. Carol just put that, she accesses 100 over 100, has that speed with fiber, but that's $99 a month. So the question of affordability, that's something that's definitely going to be addressed in your next section, or the one after, on digital inclusion. But yeah, I see some people putting those speeds in there. So you'll notice when you click on this, and I might actually go ahead and just do it along with you so that you can see, it gives you directions. You can go through those, but it's a pretty simple process. So you can have the option of entering an exact address or just a partial address. Either way, you can't click on that map and see someone's exact address. So I usually just end up doing the exact address because, I like providing good data, and they are collecting information about internet cost. So that is one of the challenges in our community, is that the service is not very affordable for many. So I'm going to be honest about my internet cost and put that in there. Then I check the address and I agree that the data is being collected by the state. This is legitimate, and they're going to start with the upload. And it's interesting, I'm supposed to be getting 10. I've been having some trouble with my router, and so I think that my low upload speeds right now have to do with my router. So the state recognizes when we do this mapping, we recognize that there are issues. Like, that's supposed to be 10 for me. Are you seeing my speed test, or am I just talking about it abstractly? Yeah, okay. Yeah, but they'll end up reporting out your download and your upload. So I can type mine into the chat, which is 44.9 over 1.17. And I have to go check my router after I give this presentation and reset it. If you're on Wi-Fi, it's not going to be exactly the speed that's being delivered. If I plugged into my Ethernet cord right now, the one that the internet service provider set up when they installed the internet in my home, I would be getting the accurate speed of that direct fiber connection. It should be 50 over 10, but because my Wi-Fi router might be having some issues, yeah. It's similar to Crystal. Yeah, it's supposed to be more. In the case of that, it could be partly the Wi-Fi, but it could also be whoever else is using that service next door to you, up the road from you. All right. Yeah, these are some interesting data coming in here. on your speed tests. All right. Last but never the least, the why of broadband, Broadband 101. If you try to go before, if you're here today because you're trying to figure out how to start communicating broadband and the need to invest at a local level in broadband to your town officials or your county commissioners, if you're trying to think of how to get your hands on some ARPA dollars to solve the problems, don't start with the what, don't start with the where or the who, start with the why. And that's why I kind of wanted to end here, because this is where I hope that we'll actually be able to do a little work to move you a little ahead of maybe wherever you are in your process right now. I love this graphic. This was created recently for actually a community visioning project on Vinyl Haven that involved just a lot of deep, kind of soul searching at the community level and envisioning the future of, what was possible for this community. And it came out in a visual form. So I think that it's kind of relevant to many of our communities. Many of us are calling in from the coast today. So as I go through the next few slides about different pillars of the why of broadband, the pillars of rural broadband, as the Benton Institute calls them. I'd like you to be taking some notes, like with whatever you have nearby or on your computer, about things that jump out to you that might be particular to your community, because we will want to, be able to come out of today with just some talking points on why broadband matters, why you're here in the first place. So I mentioned the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society is a website with a lot of great resources. They do a lot of studies around broadband and other social infrastructure, but they have 6 pillars specifically for rural communities. These things matter in cities as well, but we're in rural communities where you lack some of the connective tissue that happens in a city just by nature of everybody being so close together and there being a lot of like physical buildings that offer services. Broadband has really become like a key connective tissue for rural communities in these 6 areas: economic development, education, telehealth, civic engagement, public safety, quality of life. The civic engagement piece, like